What is up, Rad Potential YouTube, and welcome to today's super radformational video. I'm gonna make a playlist for my radformational videos. Anyways, what are we gonna do today? Well, we are gonna dig out every engine that I have here that's put together, and we're gonna go through them, and I'm gonna tell you, using the assorted junk, what to look for when buying a rotary engine. So, to preface this, I have three very good candidates sitting here. First one, this is a GSLSE 6-port. It came out of a car that has been sitting for a long time. As you can see, we literally have stuff in the water pump, mouse nest in the rat's nest, etc. But it does turn over freely. So, that's a big plus. Over here, this is the original motor from my rotary truck. It's old school 6-port, turns over freely, it runs, but it has a blown oil control ring, so it smokes really bad, but it'll be a good one to show you. This one is the white race car engine, GSLSE 6-port 13B, runs perfect. So that one's freshly rebuilt. I rebuilt it last year, ran it in the car a couple times, pulled it back apart to paint the car. So I'm going to get all three of these lined up in the center, placed such that we can literally just hop between each one, turning them over. I have a starter laying over here. I'm going to use a bell housing that I have from a Series 5 transmission that we can put on to crank them all over. And then I have also the rotary compression tester here. We're going to go ahead and compression test each one. And then I'm just going to give you like my thoughts on the numbers, things to look for. We'll pull the exhaust manifolds off of each one, which those two already are, and that one we will. And I know pretty much what's wrong with all of them, so I'll be able to tell you things to look for. So let's go ahead, get these organized, and we'll start dropping some knowledge on you. Alright, my dudes, we got all these lined up. So, in order, from right to left, 6-port. It's actually a Series 4 6-port, GSLSE 6-port, 13B old school. So, when you are looking to buy a rotary engine, and I'm saying this as buy a rotary engine, not buy a rotary engine car, because a rotary engine car has a rotary engine. So this applies for everything with the rotary engine, sand rail, anything and everything. First thing you should do is understand which engine you have, okay? So there's a big difference between a 4-port old school, so right here, 1, 2, 3, 4 ports across this engine, and then a 6-port GSLSE engine, notice, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and also a 4-port turbo, the 4-port REW engine from a FD RX-7, 3-rotor stuff, is in a league of its own. And basically, the number means how many intake ports. The series afterwards is going to tell you what intake you can use. Okay, so a 4-port FC or a 4-port FC engine, a 4-port FC engine and a 6-port FC engine will fit the same manifold on it, meaning the bolt pattern here. So your bolt pattern between these, there's a bolt, a stud, a bolt, is the same between the 4-port and the 6-port. However, on an FD, the newer one, the bolt pattern is totally different. Port shape's totally different. Now, on an old school, like this truck motor right here, the bolt pattern for the ports is different from the FC, and it's different from the FD engine, right? So, a 12A engine is its own thing. Now, one of the weird complex things, I'll put the little dot in the corner for the other video, but your 12A can be mixed with 13B parts to make an old school 4-port 13B. So be aware of that. You may have 12A plates with 13B rotors and housings and have a 13B. So know what series of engine you're getting into. Reasons. 6-port and, or let me rephrase that. Reasons. FC engines and newer have 2mm apex seals, okay? What that means, at the tip of your rotary engine up here, you have an apex seal, right? The thickness of this apex seal in an FC engine, an FD engine, turbo engines, etc. is 2mm. Now, on an old school or a GSLSE. This is where it can get confusing. A GSLSE is a 6-port engine, but on an old school, in a GSLSE motor, you have a 3mm apex seal. Now, you may see some turbo engines, FD engines, assorted things, high boost applications, whatever you want, machined to fit 3mm apex seals because they are stronger, although being more rotational mass makes more drag. Topic for another day, but know that. So, reason being, you're going to come over here. If you have the option, and you're just sitting here, you're buying an engine from some dude's shop, just like me, say it's laying under the desk, you go dig it out, he's like, man, it was rebuilt 10 years ago, but it hasn't ran since then. Well, a couple issues with that. Within these engines are rubber gaskets. As you know, rubber deteriorates and dries out over time. You'll get seals inside your engine that, you know, look like this. They just like break apart, come apart, no problem. So, you may think that engine runs, but it might have a popped seal inside of it. Things to look for popped seals, symptoms, right? So, this engine here, my truck motor, has a popped oil control ring. I don't know which rotor it was, I was pretty sure it was the rear. You're going to see in this engine how that there is an absurd amount of oil and junk around these exhaust ports. The intake ports are usually dry, but notice just how crusty and oily it is around the exhaust ports, right? So, the oil control seal is a seal on your rotor. It is this seal right here, goes around the circle, and that keeps oil that is lubricating the main bearings from getting in the combustion chamber. If you have an oil control ring leak, your engine will smoke. It may not smoke under normal driving. However, if you rev it out real high and let off the throttle, so on decel it might smoke, cold start it might smoke, or it might just smoke all the time if you're in bad shape. But mine would smoke a little bit on startup, but it would only smoke really bad on decel from high RPM. When the engine's pulling a vacuum, it would draw oil in. So, the second method of failure, and I'm going to move to an FC engine to explain this to you. A coolant seal failure. Piston engines have head gaskets, rotary engines have coolant seals. Within this engine, you have a coolant jacket around the perimeter of the housings and also around the perimeter of the irons. And that coolant jacket, if it leaks, will leak directly into the combustion chamber, and you will be getting coolant all up in here. And when the engine turns over, it's going to burn it, right? So you may crank your engine over with the radiator cap off and see bubbles come out. Okay, or you may crank your engine over and see coolant come out of your exhaust. Bad thing. Those are two things you need to worry about when you're buying a car that's been sitting for a while. Now, you might get lucky, the coolant may have stayed in, it may not have leaked. The other thing, coolant seals do pop. When that happens, the engines are super rusty and they probably won't turn over. So, keep those in mind as well. Now, if your engine is on a stand, or just out of the car, on the table, on the whatever, sitting out, and you can access everything, okay? You're going to grab a 19mm socket, and you're going to go to your engine, and I want you to turn it over. Try. So, the front bolt on a rotary engine is a 19mm, and you want to turn it over. Okay? Now look at this. You can see right there my popped oil control ring spitting buckets of oil out this motor. Now, hear the nice noise that's coming out of here. That right there is a sign of compression. You're going to hear it, right? Now, I'm going to go over to this other 6-port and do the same thing, and it's not going to sound the same. Okay? So keep my 19 on the front. Oh, we got one. Notice, there's like one good pulse in there, right? So, because you only hear one good pulse on that one in a row, and because on this one, you hear all sorts of good pulses, and I can barely turn the dang thing, that is an easy way to tell that your engine is probably not making compression. Now, don't take that as it's ruined, it's blown up, it's never going to run ever, because you're not quite stuck there. So, This engine, for example, has been sitting a long time. You can see, let me get this turned to the right spot here, and I'll show you, get my light shining. If you look in this exhaust port, you're going to see the apex seal come by right there. Okay, so if you look down in here, you can see that the rotor in there, that rusty looking dirtiness. Notice these exhaust ports are also super small. So what you're going to want to do in this situation, you can see the rotor and the apex seal in there. If you can get your finger in here, you're going to want to feel that apex seal, and you can feel it move up and down. It's very hard to show this. You can kind of see it moving in there. So if you can access that and you can turn the motor over and every apex seal is free and the engine still doesn't make compression or the whooshy noise, most likely something else has happened. This is also a great inspection to see, do you have all 6 apex seals? One could have spit it out somewhere, that's why it's not making compression. Could be a stuck side seal. That's something you really can't check. You can kind of, which it's impossible to show it, if you have the engine on a standard, you can feel, like I said, feel in this intake port here. As you turn this over, you can get it to where you can kind of feel the side seals and the apex seal and stuff going on, and you should be able to feel, hear my finger making noise, that's the side seal. Now I can't feel that it's pushing in and out, but that's what's going on there. So doing all of these things are going to help you determine, is the inside of your engine okay. Now you may look at one of these engines and it might just be straight up locked up, right? Not turning. You get up here, you got a breaker bar on this thing, it just won't go. Fortunately, I don't have a locked up engine here to show you, but one thing that you can try, and this would help you if you have, let's say, an apex seal that's not springy. If you have one that's not springy and you can get it unstuck, the engine might run. So the typical junkyard, backyard dude that wants to make an engine run is going to go to a junkyard, get a motor. He's going to grab a bunch of Marvel mystery oil. Old school trick is to dump Marvel mystery oil all down in your intake. Get a whole bunch in there, let it soak for a couple days, try to turn the motor over, dump some more in there, try to turn the motor over, maybe you'll get it unstuck. Say you get the motor unstuck, keep that thing soaking full of Marvel mystery oil, turn it over a bunch of times, and you might just be fine. But you always run the risk of, like, maybe your housing looks like this on the inside and it's all rusty and crusty or like that, and it's literally going to eat itself alive super quick. So I personally don't like to take that risk because housings are hard to find. And if you mess up a housing, i.e. it looks like this on the inside and it's all crusty, rusty, and terrible, like that, good luck finding one. You're going to pay good money for one, for a good usable one, and don't ask me for one because I probably won't sell you one. So, things to look for on your rotary engine. Now, doing a compression test, super easy. You're going to take your compression tester right here, get you one, borrow one from a friend, hit somebody up, maybe you can pay them $50 to mail it to you, and then you can use it and then mail it back, that kind of deal. You get you a good friend like that, it'd be awesome. So you take your compression tester right here, and you're going to put it in a trailing spark plug hole. Pop out a trailing plug, just like this, trailing plug. Leave the leading one in. If you pulled that out, it would make 0 compression. So, before we do that, obviously, if I can't turn this over by hand fast enough, don't get me wrong, we've tried. You almost can. I'm going to go ahead and put this bell housing on and grab a starter so we can crank this engine over. Alright guys, so you're going to get your compression tester hooked up. It might be in the car, might be on whatever. You never know, okay? You're going to get it hooked up. It's going to say, begin cranking. So I'm just going to short this little alligator clip out on here, and you'll see the compression tester is going to change. Okay, so now right there, RPM, corrected numbers. Boom. So what these mean are, right now, you're going to see pop up on the screen, 58, 62, 54 with an RPM of 118, and then now it's 998, 105, 101. So your starter controls compression. If you watch me compress and test my rally car, the torque in the starter is going to put more force into the sensor. There you go. So That video is super good. I do the test on the car, hot and cold. You can see the variation in numbers in that one. I will link it above. So, what these numbers mean though, that this rear rotor is healthy, and you heard it cranking over. It's making some good pulses. And this was the motor that just a little bit ago we turned over by hand and it didn't work. So, or it didn't make even pulses all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this to the front rotor and you'll see what I'm talking about. Alright guys, so this is the front rotor, the one that should have some dead holes. My camera died during the mid-film, so I'm going to film it again. You're going to get to see it right here. Dog, get out of the way. Boom. 20, 40, 47. Alright, so you can see that one hole that has a 20 psi compression, which is 30 psi corrected for RPM, is causing this one to not be happy. Now, given that the rear rotor is healthy, this engine might start and run. However, it's not going to be running at peak performance. The other thing that could be potentially happening in this one is, if you notice, there's one down hole and then two that are pretty average. You could just have a stuck seal. And what that means is the side seal stuck, apex seal stuck, and this motor might be decent to try to just like throw some Marvel Mystery Oil 2-stroke in it and turn it over and try to free it up. But, as you know, I just said, I'd prefer to tear it all down and do it. Sometimes you might just have a junk car, you can slap it in and let it eat. So, know that. This is a bad compression test in my opinion for the value of an engine. So if you're going to go buy a motor and it looks like this on your numbers, don't pay a ton of money for it. Pay like cheap, right? Because it's not healthy. It's going to need a rebuild. Average rebuild cost could be $1,000, do it yourself, up to $4,000 if you have to replace housings or irons, rotors, you name it. Those parts are getting expensive and it's not fun. So, moving towards, we're going to say, a running engine, right? Or an engine that's in a car and the guy's telling you the fuel pump doesn't work and it's not running, or the ignition coil quit. So, I will 100% advise you to compression test every rotary engine you're going to buy. Or at least pull the plugs out, okay? Pull the two plugs out, you'll have exhaust on the car, everything will be in the car. Pull the two plugs out and crank it over so you can make sure that you hear 6 even pulses. Okay, you want to hear out of those plugs. If you hear and you get an intermittent in there, that means it's got a dead hole, and that's not a good sign for the guy saying that the fuel pump quit or my ignition coil is bad, right? So keep that stuff in mind. I know people put these engines in everything, Volkswagens, rotary cars that had rotary engines, maybe a 240SX, maybe a BMW E30, maybe, I don't know, a Datsun mini truck, you name it. So if you're watching this video and looking at buying a rotary engine, those are the things I would check for sure when buying one. A couple suggestions. Rotary engines, the different series, mount different ways. So, a first generation or old school engine would have these front motor plates down here on the front of the engine like that. And you can see they have a nice flat area to mount the engine from. An FC series engine, so from 86 to 1991, is going to have the engine mounts on the center iron. Now I don't have one here that I can show you that's all put together, but the oil pan is shaped differently. There's an engine mount built into the oil pan right here, and then there's one that mounts on the other side, basically like right on the center iron where that flat spot is on the middle. So that could fit in a different car than the front mount style, right? You know, most V8 cars, the mounts are in the center. The early V8 cars, like in my mom's 57 Chevy, the mount's on the front. So you might have to build your own mount. Thirdly, an FD engine, the REW or the Cosmo RE. Those mount on the rear iron. And on the back of the rear iron, there's a flat spot across the whole back of the rear iron. And there's a 2-3 bolt huge mounts that mount there, and the front of the engine hangs out over the steering rack. So that could also benefit you into mounting your rotary engine into something else. As far as other bits and pieces go on these engines, most of them you'll see, old schools will have distributors. If it has igniters on it, that means it has electronic ignition. Fuel injectors are very, very important and often overlooked. If you're trying to put a carburetor on one of these engines and you buy a newer style engine, you're going to have two holes in this center iron down there that aren't going to be filled by a carburetor. So there are companies that make little inserts you can put in there. My rotary truck has actual fuel injectors in it with a fuel rail, and then I run the carburetor in addition to that, just so the fuel injectors hold the holes closed. You can do whatever you want. Old school engine like this, notice no holes for the fuel injectors. Most of them, FC engines, old school engines, water pumps are all the same. Front covers are all about the same. The FC front cover doesn't have that mount on it. It looks like this one here with no mount. The water pumps will change based on what alternator you want to run, so you have to make a different spacer for your alternator stuff. They do make side mount alternator kits if you want to put the alternator down here, like where my negative battery terminal is hooked onto. This engine here, like I said, with the oil control ring leak, will run perfectly fine. It'll just smoke. Some coolant seal engines, or engines that have blown coolant seals, will run perfectly fine. They'll just use a little bit of coolant. You got to make sure you don't overheat them. Yeah, I mean, there's really, like, that's kind of the gist of it. I mean, if I'm going to buy a rotary engine, first thing I do, crank it over. If it's hard to crank over, like by hand, it's probably got good compression or something's broke. If it doesn't crank over at all, something's broke, it's stuck. As far as clutches and flywheels, there's companies that make adapters and stuff to run any clutch or flywheel on these units. So if you're going to swap it, go for that. Like I said, that's pretty much it. My personal, the one that I use, you can see around here, I'm a big old school rotary guy. I've got first gens, Repu, Cosmo, stuff like that. So those are all the engines and front covers that I particularly hoard, because I can just use a different front bar for whatever car I'm using the engine in. Also, transmissions, okay? Every rotary engine, besides, we'll say, the automatic FD engine and your 3-rotor FD engine, and I believe your early, like some of the early twin Dizzy stuff, uses the same bell housing. So for example, I have a 12A in my race car. It has an RX-8 transmission on the back of it. You could put an FD transmission on the back of an FC engine. You just have to run the FD style clutch. You could put a SA, like a first gen 5-speed in an RX-8 if you really wanted to. You would have to get a lightweight counterweight for the back, like up here, which I have a video on those, and then run a small diameter flywheel to fit in that transmission. Turbo, RX-8, FD all have big diameter flywheels. All the NA motors have small diameter flywheels. I've got a couple back there, and I have a video on that too. I'll link it as well. So yeah, comment below with any questions you have. I will answer them. That's my 411 on what to look for when buying one of these engines. Everything that you see rotary wise is probably going to be 30 to 40 years old. So know that these parts are old. They're not going to be perfect. Personally too, most of the time, dirtier, grimier engines tend to like have better soft seals because there's less drying out of the seals. So like this one being all messy, I would anticipate the coolant seals and oil control ring stuff to be like not dry rotted and tore apart. But when I got the truck, the guy that I got it from somebody who was sitting, so it's not a weird thing that the oil control rings leaked. And you may buy a rotary engine from somebody that's running perfect, get it home, put it in your car, and it might have issues. I mean, it is a car. Cars have problems. So there's 3 engines. Oh, one last thing. I don't know if I mentioned this in the coolant leak portion, but if your FC engine is drinking coolant, one of the most common FC engine failures, I would say, coolant seal failures, is not an actual rubber seal failure to start. It is a iron failure. On an FC, this one will work, right? Yeah. On an FC, This groove right here for the coolant seal to sit in is built into the cast iron like plates. Those tend to crack the lip off into the coolant jacket, and you'll get a coolant seal leak right there. It'll be like right in here normally, or up here, and it'll crack that off and you'll get a coolant seal leak. Now that means you need a new iron, or I've seen some people like epoxy JB weld a side seal or something, or an apex seal spring in there and make it work. I'd prefer put a new iron in it. It's your car. You don't want to take it off. You don't want to do rework. I've rebuilt the same engine 3 times. It's not fun. Get to it. So, also, high mileage motors, heat cycles will tear up the springs on your apex seals. So, occasionally, high mileage motors, it's not an actual that the seal itself has worn down. It's more so that the springs that hold those in there don't have enough spring tension. So RX-8 engines are notorious for cooking side seal springs, and that's where they lose compression, because RX-8s have side exit exhaust ports. So instead of having center exit exhaust ports like this, they exit in the irons on the side, and you have like 6 holes across here. So other things to look at. RX-8 engines are kind of their own deal, especially intakes and stuff like that. So keep that in mind. But with that, comment below with any questions. I'll do my best to answer them. If I can't answer them, I bet I know somebody that knows the answer, and I will find it for you. And let me know if there's anything else you want me to do as far as information on these old engines. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Keep it rad.